So this is the former Soviet Union. We have a post-Soviet movies class, right? So let's see what it actually looks like now in terms of the map. Okay, let's orient ourselves. Europe is here. We don't see most of Europe here, right? This is Turkey, which goes way down. Turkey is huge, right? And here we have like Iran, China. So look at Russia. Everything in yellow is Russia proper. Look at how huge it is. It's not on the screen, but Alaska is here, America is to the right, and it kind of has a very tiny body of water separating Alaska from the very, very east of Russia. It's huge. Look at this Arctic Circle. Look how much of the country is beyond, like above the Arctic Circle. So this is all like permafrost, right? This is all like frozen. All of this, look at that. Remember that the poster we saw from, the screenshot we saw from that depressing northern beach, right? That the poor guy was sitting. So this is going on somewhere here, I think. That's summer over there. Okay. Look how northern this is. Now, do you want to know where New York is compared to these places? You're going to be shocked. New York is here. So New York basically is more to the south than anything in the former Soviet Union. Definitely than anything in Russia. So Russia proper is all to the north of New York. So the south of Russia, including the beaches and all of that, is still to the north of New York. Most of it is Canada. And we have a whole, like 3/4 of the country going down south from New York, right? And there, everything is to the north. Climate is a big deal. It informs a lot of what's going on there. All of this is Siberia, right? Most of this is like frozen 6 months out of a year. Imagine if this is New York, most of what's going on above this line from October to April is dark almost all day long. Like the sun doesn't come up. Half the country, basically. 3 hours of daylight for 5 months, which also means that in the summer, it's 20 hours of daylight, 20 hours of sunshine. Imagine that, like there is no night, basically, for a month in the summer. This, of course, provides a lot of interesting, cultural references that we just don't have over here. So climate informs a lot of culture and literature and things that we can't even imagine. In one part of the world, there is a snowstorm and it's an event of a decade with kids skipping school and playing outside and public transportation collapses, and that could be a theme of a movie, correct? Like this is a good premise for a movie. While in another location, snow means that kids go to school on skis. There are places in the world that kids ski to school every day. All these things, they affect a lot of culture. Okay, so let's take a look. These all are the countries of the former Soviet Union, which are now independent countries. Let's go from top to bottom. Estonia, this tiny, tiny piece of land is Estonia. Latvia, Lithuania, Vilnius, right? This is Belarus, the last standing dictatorship of Europe, basically, with a dictator who's been there since 1990s. He's been there longer than Putin. And then look at this little piece of yellow here. This is very important, right? So this is Russia is in yellow. These countries have their own colors. Look at this yellow. What is this? Kaliningrad, correct. So this is a Russian city that is not connected to Russia by land. Okay, do you know a name for such a situation? There is a word for that. An enclave is something when something is inside something else. So this situation is the opposite and it's called exclave. So there is an enclave and there is an exclave. Okay, this is an exclave. It's a part of the country that's outside of the country and it's not connected by borders. Now, these things are super important in politics, geopolitics, culture, everything. Now, why is this important? So this is Poland. You see the red border? The red border was the border of the Soviet Union. Okay, so this was all part of the Soviet Union, including all of these countries. So while it was part of the Soviet Union, the city was connected by land because everything was part of the same country. These were like republics, like Alaska, right? Alaska is an exclave, right? So when these countries got their independence, Kaliningrad turned out to be separated. Now, these countries, like Lithuania, for example, it's stuck in between. You hear about Lithuania here being one of the staunchest Russian opposition countries, right? This is one of the countries that really is scared and pushes for sanctions, European. They're all part of the European Union now. These countries, they're all part of the European Union. So they push the European Union for like stricter sanctions, for helping Ukraine more. It's these three little countries. They were part of the Soviet Union. They were colonized basically after World War II by the Soviet Union. And now they're really scared of it. Well, part of the reason is because there is a lot of rhetoric from Russia that they need access to Kaliningrad. Well, you can fly, but what about trade, oil, and all kinds of stuff that you can't fly? So you have to do trains, you have to do trucks. Lithuania has to let you do that. And now, after the war, they closed the borders. They don't want Russian trucks, for example, hauling things back and forth. Who knows? Maybe that's weapons. Maybe who knows what that is, right? So that became even more contentious. Now, Russia, in response, says, well, then maybe we should like occupy a piece of this land. They call it a corridor with a certain name. You don't need to really know that, but you can read about that. Right now, in order to have that under Russian control, you have to wage war on Lithuania. There is no other way to do it. Lithuania is not just give a piece of land, right? And Lithuania is now part of NATO. All these countries are part of NATO. So if you start fighting over this corridor, that's like you starting a war with NATO. You see, I just gave you like a little piece of like political information that like explains so much. Well, it's a tiny piece of all the tensions, but it's like such an important piece, and you just don't hear things like that. You don't, these things are not really discussed in the news. You need to be really educated about that stuff and understand why are these people fighting? Why are these people taking sides against those people, right? You look at the map and then you see half of the problems that arise, right? Now, this is Ukraine, of course. And this is Crimea that's been occupied by Russia in 2014. Now, one of the movies that we're going to watch, The Student, takes place in Kaliningrad. Now, why is Kaliningrad there at all? Well, because after World War II, the Soviet Union, together with allies, right, with America and Britain and France, they won the war against Nazi Germany. So after the war, they divided Europe. That was part of the agreement. Western Europe went under Western control, and Eastern Europe went under the Soviet control. That's how all these countries, Poland and the Czech Republic and Eastern Germany, Berlin was divided by half because the East went to the Soviet Union basically, and the West went to the West. So while they were not formally part of the Soviet Union, only these borders were Soviet, remind you, right? But all these countries here, Poland, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, Hungary, they were under the Soviet control. They were socialist countries. They were very closed off. People could not travel to the West, etc., etc. So this city belonged to Germany a while ago. You know who was born in this city? The most famous German philosopher you might know. Immanuel Kant was the biggest German philosopher. So the city was called Königsberg, and then it became part of the Soviet Union because this is how they divided up Europe. So it's like this never-ending cycle. One war causes division of land and property and all of that, and then 50 years later you have another war over that divided land. This is what's going on with Ukraine. You know, they occupied Crimea 10 years ago. They consider it Russian now. Ukraine, of course, didn't agree. They occupied the most eastern part of Ukraine, which is called the Donbas. We're going to watch some Ukrainian movies about that. It's occupied, and the war is now that's waging right now is over this piece of eastern Ukraine at least. I mean, they would probably want to have the whole of Ukraine if they could, but they can't. But at least the eastern part of Ukraine divided by the river Dnieper. You see this river here, and I myself come from Kharkiv, city that's right here in the east, so it's being bombed every day. You know, Kiev is the capital, bombed every day. Russia now, they see they can't occupy all of the country. They realize that, but they want the West to recognize these parts in this occupied part to be Russian legally. They just occupied it 4 years ago, okay? They wanted to be legally accepted, just like Königsberg was legally accepted as being Russian, Soviet 60 years ago. Well, guess what's going to happen in another 50 years? Now, this little piece you see here, this is Moldova, which used to be part of Romania. This is Romania. But guess what? After World War II, the Soviet Union got this little piece of Romania, called it Moldova. And then it got its independence. The first thing Russia did was occupy a piece of Moldova, which is right here on the border with Ukraine. And it's been occupied for the last 35 years. Now, with the war in Ukraine, Moldova is starting, they had just had an election to join the European Union, so it's important to them to get their independence from Russia as much as they can. Same thing here. If I start telling you about all these countries, we're going to have to talk about wars and wars and wars and about Russia trying to occupy pieces of their land. Same story all over again. If we talk about Georgia, here, this is the country of Georgia. We're going to watch a movie from Georgia. Notice it's very close to Turkey, and that's going to be important for the movie. This little piece of northern Georgia close to Russia is occupied by Russia, and it happened in 2008. The whole world let them get away with it. So this is Armenia, this is Azerbaijan, this is the Caucasus, okay? And this is Central Asia. We're going to watch a movie from Central Asia as well. So this is Kazakhstan, the biggest one. This is Uzbekistan. This is Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. We're going to watch a movie from Kyrgyzstan, actually. So all of this region is Central Asia. This is Europe, and then the rest of it is Russia. Okay, so this is the geography.